Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 11 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this video, we'll pick up where we left off from the previous video, and we'll go over the rest of the edit tools that we can use in the Arrange area. So we'll cover the Pencil tool, Eraser tool, Text tool, Glue tool, Solo tool and Solo mode, Mute tool, Fade tool, as well as how to fade multiple regions simultaneously. We will intentionally skip the Automation Select and Automation Curve tools, as well as the Flex tool, but we'll come back to them in future videos as they become relevant. In the previous video, I showed you that you can access your tool menu up here, but there's actually a faster way to do this. If you hit T on your keyboard, it'll actually open up a kind of a quick access tool menu where you can select what tool you want. And you'll also notice that there's a little number to the right side of every tool, or like a number or a letter, actually. And if you hit that number on your keyboard, or that letter on your keyboard, it'll actually select that tool for you. So if I hit 2 here, it'll actually select the Pencil tool for me. And now I have the Pencil tool engaged in my left-click tool. You can also do this with the Command-click tool if you want. You just hit T to open up the menu again. And then as you hold down the command button, you select with your mouse the tool that you want to select. So what I did here is I selected the Eraser tool as my command-click tool. I should also mention that in Logic 9, in order to open up this quick access menu, you had to hit Escape on the keyboard rather than T. Alright, so now that I've got the Pencil and Eraser tools selected, let's go over those. The Pencil tool has basically 3 main functions. The first function is that if you click on an empty area of an audio track, what it does is it opens up the Open File dialog, which essentially lets you import audio files into your project. In Logic 9, the Pencil tool basically just created a blank audio region on your audio track, so it was basically useless. For MIDI and instrument tracks, you can click on a blank area, just like we did before, and what it does is it'll create a blank MIDI clip for you, and so you can stretch out the region here, and then you can go ahead and double click on it with the pointer tool. And what that'll do is it'll open up the piano roll editor so you can start typing in and composing music. And I realize we haven't really talked about MIDI recording or MIDI editing yet, but we'll get there eventually in a future video. So I'm just going to hit P to close out my piano roll editor, and then I'm just going to delete this blank MIDI clip. All right, another function of the Pencil tool is used for automation. And automation really is a mix function, not really an edit function. And the way you can show automation on a track is to select the track and then hit A on your keyboard. What you'll see by default is this line. It's called a breakpoint envelope, and this allows us to change control values across time, usually mix values. So in this case, the line is controlling our volume across time. And the way you can turn on or turn off automation on a track is by clicking on this icon here. You can enable or disable automation on a track. So one way to do this is with your pointer tool. You can just click to create different automation nodes. So you're creating breakpoints in the envelope, and you can manually create fades this way. You can fade in and fade out like I've done here. What the Pencil tool lets us do with automation is it lets us create freehand automation as opposed to linear automation like we did with the pointer tool. So you can just click and draw in any shape you like. Now this will be useful later when we're editing maybe synthesizer parameters or mix parameters or plugin parameters, which we'll eventually talk about later, but for now it's not really relevant because automation is really more of a mix function rather than an editing function. And you can also hide and show automation here by clicking on this icon instead of hitting A on your keyboard. So the next 2 tools are the Text tool and the Glue tool. So I'm going to select my Text tool for my left-click tool, then I'm going to hit T again, and then hold Command and select the Glue tool, so it's in my Command-click tool. What the Text tool does, it allows you to rename the name of a region. So for instance, my electric jazz bass here, which is a MIDI region, you can click on that and then type in any name you want. And so it'll just rename that region to whatever you type in. A second function of the Text tool is you can actually split up a region, or you can have a series of regions, and you can name them in a series. So let's try that with our guitar part up here. I'm going to first split it into some different segments, and then what I'll do is I'll rename each segment in a series. So what I'll do is I'll grab the scissors tool that we used in the previous video, And then what I'll do is I'll split this at measure 5, measure 7, and then also measure 9. So I've got 4 different regions now. And instead of having these named as they are, what I'm going to do is select all of them with the pointer tool, and then grab the text tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the very first one bass 1, or excuse me, it's not bass, it's guitar. I'll type in guitar 1. And what it'll do is instead of naming all 4 of them guitar 1, it'll actually name them guitar 1, guitar 2, guitar 3, and guitar 4. So I find this really helpful if you're trying to like split a recording into multiple recordings and you want each region to be named separately. This is really helpful for like sampling and things like that. Now, before we go on to the glue tool, and while we've been talking about the scissors tool here, I want to show you another way that you can separate regions. What you can do is if you show your toolbar up here, mine's already shown, so I just want to show you where that icon is. There's 2 options here, split by Playhead and split by Locators. Essentially, using these functions allows you to never have to select the scissors tool if you don't want to. So what I can do is I can place my Playhead where I want to split the region at, and then just hit split by Playhead, and it'll separate it. So I can go ahead and separate this at measures 5, 7, and 9, like I did before, without actually having to choose my scissors tool. The other thing that we can do is we can move our locators and hit split by locators, and it'll split up the region based on the left or right side of the locators. So that's kind of nice. The one thing you have to be careful of with this, though, is it'll only split regions that are selected. So right here, I'm trying to split it at in between measures 8 and 9. Even though I'm moving the playhead in between 8 and 9, it's not actually splitting that because I haven't selected that region. So what I'd have to do is select the region, then go up to split by playhead, and then it'll split it. So another cool trick that you can do with these 2 functions is if you select a range of regions that are stacked vertically, like all 3 of these here, you can set your playhead wherever you want it to go, and then hit split by playhead, and it'll actually cut up all of them together. And I didn't show this in the last video, but the scissors tool will actually do this as well. All right, so now that we've got all these regions that are separated, let's put them back together again with the glue tool. And so what the glue tool does is it's essentially a join tool. It joins regions back together. So what I can do is select a series of regions that are right next to each other, click on them with the glue tool, and it joins them back together again. So we're basically healing the separations. So if you'd rather not waste time pulling out the glue tool, you can actually use the join icon up here on the toolbar, and it'll do the exact same thing. So one thing to keep in mind with all of these regions we've joined back together is that they all originally were part of a larger region. And this really doesn't matter for MIDI files or the drummer track, but for audio files it does. When you split up a region into 4 separate regions but keep them in the same order and join them back together, you're just joining them back to the original file again. But if you separate them and then maybe reorder the files in some way. So for example, what I'll do is I'll take my pointer tool here and I'll move my second clip to be the last clip and then move the other clips forward. Now they're out of order. So if I drag over these to join them back together, Logic's going to have to render a new file because the audio is not the same as it was before. So you can do this with the join icon, or you can do it with the glue tool, and you'll get this window that says non-contiguous audio regions require the creation of a new audio file. So you just say create, and what it does is it consolidates and renders a new file with the clips in our new order. It was 1, 3, 4, 2 rather than the old order 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, next up is the solo tool. So I'm just going to hit T and then choose solo tool. And the solo tool has a function that's kind of similar to pressing solo on the track, except that instead of soloing the whole track, it actually just solos out an individual region. The solo tool in Logic is essentially a scrub tool, or what's known as a scrub function in a lot of other DAWs. What scrubbing does is it allows you to click on a region and then just kind of audition that region by itself without hearing the rest of the session playback as well. So I'm just going to click on my guitar track here with the solo tool. So there we go. We just used the solo tool on just the guitar. We could do this on the drummer track or the bass guitar track as well. Now, there's another function in Logic that's kind of related to the solo tool. It's called solo mode, and you can find it right up here on the control bar. And remember, if you need to add something to the control bar, you just right-click here and choose Customize Control Bar and Display. So you turn on solo mode, and what it lets you do is select just a region, and when you hit play, it'll just play that region by itself. So let's try it on our guitar track here. And on the bass. And then on the drums. You can also use solo mode in pairs and groups, so you can solo like the guitar and the bass here. Or maybe the bass and the drums. Or we can do all three. So there you go. That's the solo mode and the solo tool. And I should also mention that you can actually solo a track just by hitting S, and then you can turn on or off solo mode by hitting Control S. So the next tool we're going to go over is the mute tool, and it's essentially the exact opposite of the solo tool. It functions a lot like muting a track, except you can mute just an individual region. So if you click on a region with the mute tool, it just mutes it. So this is great because you can audition a song with or without a region without actually having to delete the region. Now, if you click the M button on the track, it mutes everything on that track. So when you mute a region, if you've got multiple regions on a track, you can just mute that one. Now in Logic 9, you could just hit M on the keyboard to mute your regions instead of using the mute tool. In Logic 10, M actually mutes the whole track for you. It's just a shortcut to mute the whole track. If you want to just mute a region, you actually have to use the key command Control M, and that'll just mute just the region. So you can kind of skip having to actually use the mute tool if you want to, just by hitting Control M. So just as an example here, let me separate all of my regions here in half by using the split by playhead function. And what I'll do is I'll just show you that when you mute one region, it doesn't affect the other regions on the track. So if I click on this one, hit Control M, the region right next to it remains unaffected. So we'll still hear this one, but we won't hear the one that's grayed out. So the next tool we're going to go over is the fade tool. And although I did show you how you can create fades with the shift control function, let's actually go in and use the fade tool manually. So with the fade tool, you can drag right to left, or you can drag left to right over an audio region to create fade-ins or fade-outs. You can also drag over the middle of the fade shape here to create exponential or logarithmic shapes. And then you can also hover over the boundary of the fade to adjust how long or short the fade, how long or short you want the fade to be. Now, let's zoom in here. I'm just going to hit Z so I can see everything better. You can also right-click on your fades and choose Remove Fade, and it'll take the fade away in case you don't want it. And one other thing I should mention is that you can't use the fade tool or fades in general on MIDI data, like my bass guitar here, and it also won't work on the drummer track regions, which are also essentially, it looks like a waveform, but it's actually MIDI data. So the way you'd actually have to fade MIDI data is using your pointer tool. You hit A to open up automation, and like we did earlier, you'll have to draw in the fade manually. So someone had asked about that, so I figured I'd throw that in this video. All right, a secondary function of the fade tool is you can actually create crossfades. And a crossfade is essentially when you have one region fading in and another region fading out. So what I've got here is just a little guitar lick, and what we're going to do is take measures 7 and 8 and put them in the place of measure 3 and 4, and then also in measure 5 and 6. And we're going to use crossfades to aid in our editing. So let's listen to what we've got. All right, so with my marquee tool, I am going to select measure 7 and 8, hold Option to make a duplicate of it, drag that over to measure 3 and 4, then I'm going to trim up measure 5 and 6, and then duplicate again. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch our snap mode to ticks. And essentially what this does is it lets us edit on a higher resolution than what we were doing before at bars. So we can now snap values to down to 1/960th of a beat. All right, so we're really zoomed in, and you can see the boundary of the two regions. And when you hover over that boundary, you get this kind of junction pointer, or junction fader. What it does is it lets you edit the in point and out point of both clips simultaneously. So then I'm just going to drag over this with the fade tool to create a crossfade. And then what we'll do is we'll zoom back out. We'll find our other edit point at measure 7, and we'll do the same thing. So just to remember that crossfades are really the key to making a recording with edits in it sound like one seamless recording. If I don't add these crossfades, well, we run the risk of having clicks and pops in the recording at the edit points. All right, so let's see what the edited version sounds like. All right, so the next thing we need to do is consolidate our edits so that we have just one new file here. And when you do that, you conserve your system resources. So let me just drag over these 3 regions. And I'm going to click on the Join button up here. And we're going to get that same window that we saw earlier. We just click Create, and it's going to render these and consolidate these into a new file for us. And there we go. We have one new region with all of the edits rendered into the file. One last thing you might want to do is add a quick little fade in or a fade out at the beginning of any regions like this. And all this does is make sure that when the region enters that you don't get a faint little pop or a click in the signal caused by maybe background hum or the noise floor. One cool new feature in Logic 10 is the ability of the fade tool to fade multiple regions simultaneously. In Logic 9, in order to do this, you'd have to select all of the regions that you'd want to fade. So I'll just select all of these, and you'd have to go over to your inspector, find your region parameters, open up that menu. You'd go down and you would find your fade in and fade out options, and you'd have to click on your fade in or fade out option and drag up to add a fade, and it measures the fade in milliseconds. Or you could double click and type in how long you want the fade to be. So here I'll type in 10,000 milliseconds, which is the same thing as 10 seconds, and you'll see it creates a 10-second fade on all of the tracks. Fortunately for us in Logic 10, the fade tool now has the ability to fade multiple regions. You just drag over all of them, fade one of them, and it'll actually fade all of them as a group. So let's hear what this fade sounds like. All right, so that's a cool little editing feature that they added to Logic 10. I'm really glad that they added it because it's going to make fading a heck of a lot easier. Now, I should mention that when you're working with live drums like this, that's probably not the best way to go about fading or editing the drums. Later on, we'll talk about group editing in a future video, and what that does is it groups together multiple tracks, and you can edit one, and all of the tracks will be edited the same way. All right, now we intentionally skipped the automation tools, the automation select and automation curve tools, and we also skipped the flex tool in this video. And the reason why is that the automation tools have really more to do with mixing than editing, but we will come back and touch on them when we start talking about MIDI controllers and continuous controllers and things like that. We'll also come back to the flex tool when we start working with flex time. However, once you learn how to use flex time, you'll find that the flex tool is, well, basically useless. In the next video, we'll talk about the snap modes and the drag modes, and we'll also start talking about some different editing techniques and editing functions outside of the typical edit tools that I showed you in this video and in the last video. There are actually other editing functions in Logic outside of the edit tools like strip silence, flex time, group editing, folders, things that we haven't talked about yet that we'll start going over in future videos. So again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks again for watching.